Well, thank you all for being here this evening and braving the heat and joining us for a cool drink. I'm very happy to welcome you all here as a co-chair and also as a board member of the National American Latino Museum. And I want to speak a little bit about it, but very little, because I want to invite somebody very special who's with us this evening, and that's the chairman of our board, Mr. Danny Vargas. When I was told that this organization, Friends of the National American Latino Museum, would like to see your credentials about getting on the board, I said, how did they get my number? I mean, how did that happen? And then things settled down, and I just felt a tremendous amount of a wash of feelings of both honor, but a sense of duty. And since history, as some of you know, is my passion, said this is right up my alley. So without further ado, I really would like you to take a couple of minutes, listen to what Danny has to say, and thank you very much for coming this evening and sharing this with us.
Thank you all very much. I want to thank Tony for being on our board of directors. We've come to rely on his leadership, his advice, his wisdom, and I want to thank the National Hispanic Business Group for supporting our efforts. On a personal note, for me it's great to be back here in New York, my hometown. Specifically, I grew up in an area called Bushwick, Brooklyn. Anybody from Brooklyn? There you go. So I grew up in Bushwick, but for the last 28 years or so I've been living in the Washington, D.C. area. Those of you who have been to Washington, you know that D.C. is a city of politics and power plays and monuments, but it's also a city of museums. Did you know that there are about 70 museums in Washington, D.C.? Big museums, small museums, art galleries, history museums, but the cream of the crop is a portfolio of 17 national museums within the Smithsonian Institution. Included among those are a couple of the new ones, the National Museum of the American Indian and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is one of the most top visited museums in the world. What you won't see, unfortunately, is the National American Latino Museum. And it's sad because when I talk to people about our initiative and we tell them that, the first thing they usually tell me is that, you mean there isn't already an existing American Latino Museum? And I agree with them because there ought to be. Because there ought to be a museum to recognize the over 500 years of Latino contributions to this country, because we need to look back at our past and understand where we came from, to understand and know where we are today and where we're going in the future. So our mission is to make sure that we can create a museum that illuminates the American story for the benefit of everyone. A more complete and accurate telling of American history. How many of you have seen those movies where you go back in time and you change something in the past and it alters your present? You've seen those movies, right? So imagine, if you will, a United States of America without roughly the bottom half and most of the West not being part of the Union. Fortunately, we don't have to imagine that, because for over 500 years, Latinos have been founding and settling communities throughout the U.S. territory. Unfortunately, we've been told in elementary school that the American story begins in 1607 when the British got to Jamestown, Virginia to establish the first permanent British settlement. Sadly, that's not true. The American story, as far as I'm concerned, begins on Columbus's second voyage to the New World in 1493, when he arrived on the shores of what is now U.S. territory in Puerto Rico. So the story of American expansion doesn't go from Jamestown, Virginia to the north and to the south. American expansion goes from the Caribbean up to Florida and into Alabama and Mississippi and Texas and on to California, as far north as Wyoming. I like to tell my friends, for example, from Alabama, I tell my friends from Alabama, you're basically a bunch of Latinos several generations removed. In fact, by the time the British got to Jamestown, Virginia in 1607, there were already a bunch of Latinos saying, "Bienvenidos, what took you so long?" So imagine, if you will, a Revolutionary War where General Washington lost the War of Independence. Fortunately, we don't have to imagine that, because Spanish General Bernardo de Galvez and 11,000 Spanish troops were there to support General Washington and make sure that we would win the War of Independence. Imagine, you can applaud that, absolutely. Imagine, if you will, a United States Navy where its first admiral during the Civil War did not utter those immortal words, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." We don't have to imagine that, because the first admiral in the United States Navy was David Farragut, or more accurately pronounced, David Farragut, descendant of Spanish soldiers. Imagine, if you will, World War II without the 500,000 Latino troops supporting the Allies. We don't have to imagine that, because they were there fighting in every theater of that campaign. Imagine the Korean conflict without the exploits of the U.S. Army 65th Infantry Regiment, the Borinqueneers of Puerto Rico. Setting the gold standard for the bravery of a combat unit. Imagine, if you will, a United States military without the young Latinas and Latinos fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq today, and the 60 Hispanic Medal of Honor recipients. As an Air Force veteran myself, my friends, I'm here to tell you, Latinos take a backseat to no one in the defense of liberty. Imagine, if you will, a television sitcom with only one camera, maybe two. We don't have to, because innovator Desi Arnaz, in his famous show I Love Lucy, came up with the idea of a 3-camera shot and a live studio audience. Imagine, if you will, Major League Baseball, our nation's pastime, without the exploits of the legendary Roberto Clemente, one of my personal heroes. Number 21, and we've got to get that number retired, don't we? Imagine baseball without the strong cadre of Latino players that he helped to usher in. We don't have to, because he was there, standing strong and proud. Imagine, if you will, the absence of Latino workers in our farms and in our factories, in our hotels and in our hospitals, in our restaurants, and in our research laboratories, in our sanitation departments, and in our Supreme Court of the United States, in our music studios and in our movie sets. We don't have to, because for over 500 years, we've been relying on Latinos to fight our wars and to run our businesses, to tend our fields and to mend our wounds, to teach our kids, patrol our streets, write our laws, and to share the word of God. My friends, contrary to what some might have you believe, Latinos are not a recent patch being sewn onto the tapestry of America. We are an essential, foundational thread woven into the very fabric of America. It is for these reasons, my friends, that we need an American Latino Museum on the National Mall as part of the Smithsonian Institution, so we can have a more complete and accurate telling of American history, so we can remember those contributions. But that's not all. We also need to enlighten the public about our community today. We know the numbers. We are 18% of the population. We are a complex, diverse community. We are Afro-Latinos, we are Asian Latinos. We are blonde-haired and blue-eyed, we are mulattos and mestizos, and everything in between. I did Ancestry DNA recently on genetic sancocho. I'm 50% Iberian, and I'm African, and I'm Native American and Western European, but that's us, that's our community. We are Republicans and Democrats and Independents. We're not a race, we are a culture. We are a culture that has some very foundational values about family and faith and freedom and optimism and passion, and those are the things that our country needs today. And lastly, in closing, we also have a responsibility to inspire future generations. The Census Bureau tells us that by the year 2060, Latinos will make up 30% of the population. 30% of the population. If we hope to remain a strong and thriving and vibrant nation, that segment of the population needs to feel acknowledged, engaged, and invested in our future. It's up to each and every one of us to make sure that we can make this museum happen. And you can help make it happen in 3 ways. Number 1, if you know a member of Congress, call them up, send them a letter, tell them you need to be a co-sponsor on the bill that we have on the floor of Congress right now to authorize this museum, the Smithsonian to move forward with this museum. Number 2, I need you to grab your phones and get on social media and let everybody know, all of your friends and colleagues and family know that you support this effort. And number 3, you can help donate to our cause. The number is up there right now to text or donate, and we invite you to do so. Because for me personally, this is a labor of love that I've been involved in for the last 11 years. Because I have a vision of a young Latina born today here in New York City. And when she goes on her 6th grade field trip to Washington, D.C., she can go to the nation's capital and she can marvel at the monuments. She can visit Capitol Hill. She can go to the museums, including the American Latino Museum, and see all of these stories that I've been talking about. And she will leave that museum proud, not only to be a Latina, but proud to be an American. Thank you all very much, and God bless you.